Fire Emblem is a strategy RPG series that has a history spanning nearly 30 years. With 16 different games released, not including spin-off titles and crossovers, it might seem like an intimidating series to get into. If you are unfamiliar with Fire Emblem, but interested to see what it's all about, then you've come to the right place. Today, I want to make some suggestions on which games are good places to begin your strategy conquest with. I want to begin by saying that the advice presented in this video is entirely subjective. This is a compilation of my personal tastes and opinions for beginners. I've played every Fire Emblem game to completion, with the only exceptions being the original versions of Fire Emblem 1 and 3. So I hope that you'll find my suggestions to come from a credible source. However, just because I say certain games are good or bad for beginners, that is in no way making my argument universal. Just because I recommend a certain game, it may not be the most ideal game for you. The best advice I can give you is to do additional research of your own, and seek multiple opinions. If you find this video to be satisfactory by itself, that's excellent. But if you don't think the suggestions I made are enough, then I would consider continuing your search until you find the perfect starting point for you. Now I think the best way to start this video is to say that for the most part, you can jump into almost any Fire Emblem game and be able to enjoy it. So there's no need to stress out on trying an exact game first. That being said, I don't believe that all games are created equal, and that there are certain games that are significantly better starting points than others. If you plan to stick around with the Fire Emblem series for more than 1 or 2 games, there are 3 titles that I think are great foundational introductions. With a certain group of people, they will typically want to start the series at its origin. And if you happen to be one of those people, then know that Shadow Dragon is actually one of my recommendations to newcomers. Being the first Fire Emblem game to come out, you'll get to start the series where it all began. Shadow Dragon was the game that laid the core foundation for the rest of the series. So if you can manage to have fun playing this game, then it's a near perfect guarantee you'll love every Fire Emblem game you play afterward. It might be a bit intimidating to jump into a story you have no connection to, however, Shadow Dragon will not be as much of a problem. The first Fire Emblem game is the one that follows the journey of Marth. The story of Shadow Dragon is not a complicated one either. It's a simple tale of a young man setting out to reclaim the continent's freedom. The story and characters are not without faults though. While the plot is fairly easy to follow, the contents can definitely feel stale. It's a classic hero's journey tale of a young boy destined for greatness that must rally a mass of allies to face the might of an evil dragon. Perhaps the story would be more interesting if it had amazing characters to populate the narrative. However, Shadow Dragon also lacks in this department as well. While all the units you control have names and faces, they receive little to no characterization. Even the main cast can feel dry and lack intrigue. It's also not the most exciting game in the world either. This is Fire Emblem at its most basic. There's not a lot of features here to stimulate your brain chemicals. You don't have a lot of tools to salvage potential mistakes, or create clever strategies to play efficiently. If you're a newcomer to Fire Emblem, this may not matter to you. But if you're already familiar with other tactics games, it may be of greater annoyance. But one advantage this game does have over other recommendations is that Shadow Dragon has the most playable versions available. The game was originally released on the Famicom in Japan. If you're a real old school gamer, this might be the version for you. After all, this is how Fire Emblem started, and it has a certain retro appeal. However, it's the least recommendable version for pretty obvious reasons. It's a slow and clunky game, lacking in many quality of life improvements that would be made later in the series. However, the game was soon remade for the Super Famicom, released packed in with the third game of the series, Mystery of the Emblem. It's a much prettier and improved version of the game. If Final Fantasy IV hits a certain aesthetic pleasure in your brain, this might be the version for you. Not to mention, since it's included alongside its sequel, you can get Marth's full story from one game. However, there is some content that was cut from the Super Famicom remake. Some chapters and playable characters from the original Famicom game are nowhere to be found in the remake. It also doesn't have the most user-friendly interface either. The DS version is the most current and recommended version to play. It's a bit expensive to find a used cartridge online, but if you have a Wii U lying around, you can get it digitally on Virtual Console. All of the cut content from the Famicom game has been fully restored, along with new characters and chapters. With many changes made to add strategic elements alongside speeding up the game's pace, it's also the most engaging version to play. But I do have to admit, it's not the most visually appealing game to look at. If you're not going to be into this art direction for 20 hours, it won't be a pleasant time for you. And unless you're able to read Japanese, or willing to install a fan translation patch to a ROM, it may be your only option. Either way, Shadow Dragon is a fine entry point for someone new to the series, so whether or not it's worth playing is up to you. While Shadow Dragon was the first game in the series, the game that many Fire Emblem fans got their start on was a Game Boy Advance title. This was called Fire Emblem Rekka no Ken, translated as The Blazing Blade. However, when localized, Nintendo just called this game Fire Emblem. If you start with this game, you'll start with what is, in my opinion, one of the best games in the Fire Emblem series. It tells a great, personal story about some young lords getting involved in a conspiracy that must be stopped, lest dragons get summoned back into the world. While this is a prequel to the previous game and will make a lot of references to it, it's not necessary to play that game to understand the context for this story. The characters are all really great too. It will let some of the side characters have some time in the spotlight every now and then as well. However, you can get to know the characters further by keeping them close together in battle, unlocking support conversations between them. It can even help to boost some of their stats. But be warned though, there's a limit to how many you can view per single playthrough. But even from a gameplay standpoint, the game is nothing to sneeze at. This is a very tight and consistent game that was structurally built with the Game Boy Advance hardware in mind. Not only does the game look visually striking even today, but the gameplay loop is expertly paced. Chapters take just the right amount of time where you can complete a significant chunk of them without feeling burnt out. Being that this was the first game in the series released to an international market, Intelligent Systems designed the game with newcomers in mind. The most obvious example of this consideration being the tutorial. For the first 10 chapters of the game, you'll follow a character named Lyn, as she goes on a journey to find the last known family she has. As you play the game, you'll be organically introduced to new situations and learn more about the variables that will affect your strategies going forward. You'll start by moving only one unit and focusing on them. Soon you'll get more units to play with. You'll learn about terrain, weapons, effective damage. The gradual build of challenge makes for the best tutorial in the series. That being said, Fire Emblem 7 also has the worst tutorial in the series. When playing this game for the first time, you'll have no choice but to sit through all the first 10 chapters doing exactly what the game says. Many turns will be wasted by having the game force you to perform certain actions it tells you, and won't let you move on until you do. For the patient and those willing to learn at the game's pace, this isn't a big hassle. But for the type of person who likes to figure games out for themselves, then this will be your biggest hurdle into enjoying this game. That being said, while it's also a pretty big negative, it's my only one detraction for why this game might not be ideal for newcomers. As long as you can stomach the tutorial, I think you'll enjoy this game a great deal. This game can also be pretty pricey to find online as well, but once again, it's also available on the Wii U Virtual Console if you still have yours plugged in. The most hardcore of classic fans have started with Shadow Dragon. The most long-standing fans today started with Fire Emblem. But if you know someone who has become a fan of the series within the past 5 years, this is probably the game they played first. Like Marth, the story focuses in on characters featured in Super Smash Bros. Chrom, Robin, and Lucina are the 3 main characters of this game, so you already know a good chunk of the game's main cast. The story is definitely more convoluted than the previous 2 suggestions I made, but it doesn't jump the shark. At least not too much. So you'll still be able to follow what's happening fairly well. Not to mention, the support system is more in-depth than it had been previously. There is no limit to the amount of conversations you can read, and if you get certain pairs of characters close enough, they can get married, and even have children that will fight alongside you. There is a lot of freedom with the system that makes repeat playthroughs offer something new each time you play the game. I played this game for hundreds of hours just because of the support system alone. Of the 3 games I talked about already, this game is also the easiest. This is mostly due to its accessibility options. In addition to the 3 starting difficulties, you'll also have access to modifiers for Classic and Casual mode. In Classic mode, the permanent death of units is here as always. However, Casual mode will only knock your units out until the next battle starts. If you're worried about losing your most powerful units, Casual mode is a great set of training wheels to start with. But even with the gameplay, it makes a number of concessions to give you the easiest time possible. You can fight in optional battles on the world map to gain some extra experience between the main story battles. But you certainly don't need to in order to progress in the game. If you want to challenge yourself, try not to do these battles if you can help it. But with the good also comes the bad. While this is one of the easier games in the series, it can feel a little too easy at times. I might be a little biased on this front, as Awakening is by far the game in the series I am the most knowledgeable about, but this game isn't that tough if you're intimately familiar with strategy games. The map design is also way more simple than most games in the series, often being very open and at times pretty dull. But if you're as green as they come, you might not even notice. There are a number of difficulty options you can take advantage of, but these aren't well balanced either. Normal is a bit too easy in my opinion, especially if you decide to play on casual mode. Hard is definitely a step up, but the late game doesn't challenge you as much as it should. It also has elements of cheap difficulty. Enemy reinforcements will attack on the same turn they appear. If it's your first time playing a Fire Emblem, this will result in some undeserved rage. Lunatic is far worse. This difficulty is nuts for people who have already played this game, requiring you to rely on some pretty unintuitive strategies to make it through. Still though, if you have a 3DS that needs to be dusted off one last time, Awakening has my full recommendation. This is one of my favorite games of all time, and I do think you'll enjoy it if you give it a shot. So those are the 3 games that I highly suggest if you're brand new to Fire Emblem. All 3 of them are really good, and I definitely recommend giving them all a try if you can. But if none of these games click with you, there are other games that generally come highly recommended by fans. Personally, I would not typically suggest these games to a first-time player, but like I said at the top of the video, my primary suggestions aren't a one-size-fits-all. So if you think these games are going to be better for you, then by all means give them a try. While Fire Emblem is one of the games I recommend the most, its sister game, The Sacred Stones, is another common recommendation given to newcomers. I do agree that Sacred Stones is a fantastic game in the series, and a must-play for Fire Emblem fans. It's just not one of the games I would suggest people to start with. It's another game with a simple story but great character interactions. The main cast isn't too interesting, though the supporting cast and villains more than make up for it. It doesn't have the most exciting start, and it does take a while before it gets enough momentum to pick up. It can also be a bit difficult to get invested in. This is one of the only games in the series that's not directly connected with the others. To some, this is great for newcomers, but while Erika and Ephraim aren't obscure characters, they're not the most easily recognizable faces either. I do think this should be one of your first games if you plan to get into the series, just not the first. Still, it's certainly not a bad point to start the series with. If it sounds like your thing, I say go for it. Path of Radiance is another commonly touted game as good for newcomers. It features Ike, after all, one of my favorite characters in the series. That's not all though. In fact, I would be willing to argue that Path of Radiance is the best game in the Fire Emblem series. It's the most well-rounded with an interesting story and great strategic elements. But there are quite a few points I have against it, not the least of which being with how hard it is to get a hold of this game. Since it's never been re-released in any capacity, getting an authentic experience requires finding some way to get a hold of a physical copy. It's not a cheap game either, with prices only rising as time moves on. If you are dedicated enough, there are certain other measures you can use to play it. Despite that, I still can't fully recommend it, the art direction actually being one of my points. Maybe 3D environments and character models are more immersive, but they don't do a good job at visually communicating information. It's harder to tell player and enemy units apart, what part of the maps are terrain, even how far some units can move. Any of the 2D games do a much better job at making these distinctions. And while the story is really good, it's also a pretty slow-paced game with a lot of dialogue. And while I do think that's one of its strengths, I can imagine it being difficult for a newcomer to get into. Still, if you're desperate to know how the story of Ike plays out, it's a good option. I'd recommend playing at least 1 or 2 other games in the series first, but I've known plenty of people that got started with this game, and I think it's fine if you do too. The one of these that I recommend the least would be the mobile game, Fire Emblem Heroes. This is a severely dumbed down version of Fire Emblem. Maps are all very small boards that will have you control teams of 4. You'll be done with each one in less than 2 minutes, and you can get a good condensed strategy game for any amount of time you wish to play for. It has an ever-updating story and characters from all over the Fire Emblem multiverse, whether that be alternate versions of the most popular characters, or additions from the obscure Japanese games. I admit it's fun to see who gets brought into this game every so often. But if you plan on getting into all the games and experiencing every story Fire Emblem has to offer, then I strongly encourage staying away from this game, since some characters present will reveal huge spoilers for climactic moments of the games. But this game does have one advantage the others don't. If you have a smartphone, then you can get this game for free. There's no need to track down a $40 game for a handheld you barely use anymore. You can download the app and play it at any time. While I cringe at the thought of this being someone's first exposure to Fire Emblem, the reality of this situation is far more significant. If you are someone so unconvinced that Fire Emblem is the series for you, well, I question why you're watching this video at all. But if this is the closest you see yourself coming to trying a Fire Emblem game, then it's at least worth giving a shot. After about an hour of playtime overall, you should have a pretty good idea if this is something you're into. I'm not an expert on Heroes. I haven't really played the game much since it first came out, as I prefer the regular games in the series. If it's something you're into, great. Just beware if you experience some bad gambling tendencies. It's a gacha game after all. So those are my best suggestions for where one should begin the series with. If I haven't talked about a game so far, it means I don't think it's really a good game to start the series with. And that includes one game in particular that I'm sure at least one person expected to be on here. When it comes to trying a series that's new to a player, the most common response people will have is to just play the latest game in the series. With Three Houses being the hottest thing right now, it probably sounds really tempting to just jump in right here. But I cannot stress the opposite enough. Three Houses is a much different game fundamentally from nearly every other Fire Emblem before it, and is in some ways a black sheep of the series. Three Houses plays more like a Persona game, so it emphasizes RPG elements while de-emphasizing strategy. In fact, Three Houses might even be the easiest game in the series. That may sound like a good thing for a beginner, but it's so skewed in that direction it can set you up for an incorrect idea for what the rest of the series is about. But that's not where my grievances for Three Houses are limited. This is also a very long game. Most Fire Emblems average around 20 to 30 hours, but for Three Houses, your first playthrough might double or even triple that length. My first run of the game lasted for about 60 hours, but other routes might see you play the game closer to 80. And that's also going under the assumption you'll finish the game satisfied with the story you experienced, as by the time you get to the ending in Three Houses, you might be left with more questions than answers, encouraging you to play the other routes to get the full story. For me, I've played all 4 possible routes in this game, and it took me over 200 hours to experience the full story. Especially if this is a genre you're not privy to, or you just want to know if this is something you'd enjoy, Three Houses has enough negative points to where I can't justify recommending it to newcomers. Now, I want to make this point clear though. If you want to try a Fire Emblem game, and all you have is a Nintendo Switch, it's not the worst possible game you could start with. Or if you're not interested in trying the other Fire Emblems and you would rather just play the latest game in the series to get in on the discussion, this is not meant to dissuade you from doing so. Three Houses is by no means a bad game. I enjoyed playing this game immensely. In my opinion, if you want to get the most enjoyment from Three Houses you can possibly get, playing a few other Fire Emblem games first will help you to appreciate what makes this game different and special. With that, all of my core suggestions have been made. As a recap, the 3 games I recommend playing the most are Shadow Dragon, which is FE1, FE3, or FE11, Fire Emblem, which is FE7, or Awakening, which is FE13. Alternative suggestions for if you want to start a game that's just a tad more exotic are The Sacred Stones, which is FE8, Path of Radiance, which is FE9, or Heroes, which is FEH. Any other game I didn't mention in this video I don't think is a good starting point for someone new to the series. Even Fire Emblem Three Houses is not the best representation of the series. However, if you do want to jump into the latest game because it's the most convenient for you, it's not the worst place to begin either. I'd say if you want to give the series a proper chance, you should try multiple games. You don't have to play them all the way through. Playing through about the first 4 maps is a pretty good gauge if you enjoy that title specifically. But if you aren't gelling with one entry, there just may be another game you'd prefer more. If you play at least 3 games and you're still not enjoying yourself, then this series may not be for you, which is okay as well. Thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. Feel free to share it around if you think it'll be helpful for people asking where to start. If you have any further questions for me about my recommendations, or even suggestions for games you should play after your first one, feel free to ask that in a comment below. Fire Emblem is my favorite video game series, and I want to do all I can to help people start out.